Good morning, and this is a paper review number 2 for the paper Smart Grid, the future of electric energy system. So this is in partial fulfillment on CPE 635, the Internet of Things and Cyber Physical Systems. So the contents of the presentation is letter A, who has or have done the work. Letter B, what were their goals or objectives. Letter C, what were the research questions, if any? Letter D, what were their methods in terms of but not limited to? Letter E, what were their findings? Letter F, what were the gaps in their studies or findings? And letter G, what are my takeaways on this paper review? So let's move on to letter A. Who have done the work? So I have here the three authors. The first is Mr. Roger N. Anderson, or rather Dr. Roger N. Anderson. He is an IEEE member and also a professor emeritus at Columbia University. So he have also done numerous works regarding this field. So he is very knowledgeable in this kind of uh, topic. And also, we have here Miss Riza Gafurian. I don't get any of his picture, but I don't know if he's male or female, but it's one of the authors. And last but not least is Mr. Hamid Garavi of IEEE, fellow member, and also he works at National Institute of Science and Technology at Brahmapur, India. Okay, so this is the three authors of this paper, and let's move on to letter B. What were their goals and objectives? So since this is not what you call this, a first or primary research, is only a secondary kind of research. uh, I have I have read and I have concluded some of their goals and I have listed here. So the first one is to introduce the concept of a smart grid and provide an overview of its components and functions. Number two, discuss the potential benefits of smart grid, such as improved energy efficiency, greater reliability, and increased integration of renewable energy sources. And number three, to identify the challenges and barriers to implementing a smart grid, such as the need for cybersecurity measures, the cost of implementation, and the need for regulatory and policy changes. And last but not least, highlight the importance of continued research and development in smart grid technology and the potential impact of smart grid on energy industry and the environment and the society as a whole. Okay, so let's proceed. Letter C, what were the research question, if any? So as I have reading this paper, I have come up with three research question. Actually, not uh, direct question, since it's only a secondary paper, but I have come up with these three. So number one, what are the benefits of a smart grid in terms of energy efficiency, reliability, and integration of your renewable energy sources? Number two, what are the challenges and barriers to implementing a smart grid and how can they be addressed? And number three, what are the different components of smart grid and how do they interact to improve the electric energy system? Okay, so let's find out if they have answered all of these questions. Uh, so letter D is what were their methods in terms of but not limited to. Number one, how have they gathered relevant data? In this particular sense, we are uh, referring to who are the participants, how is the data gathering set up, and what are the tools or techniques used in data gathering. Number two, how do they form the data set? How do they form the data set and how do they clean the data? And number three, how do they process the data? So let's dig into that. So how have they gathered relevant data? So as I have read this paper, I have concluded that the authors gathered relevant information and data from a variety of sources, including academic papers, industry reports, and government publications. They used as a systematic approach to identify and select the most relevant and up-to-date information on the topic of the smart grid. The paper does not describe the participants' data gathering setup or tools, techniques used in data gathering, as no primary data was collected. Instead, the authors used secondary sources and analyzed the information to provide a comprehensive overview of the smart grid and its potential benefits, challenges, and future prospect. As I have said earlier, this is not a primary research but a some kind of a review about the uh, the future of smart grid, which is the integration, of course, of iOS and IoT and CPS, cyber physical systems, and they synthesize and analyze the data so that they can have a findings, and they can uh, select what is they can comprehend the benefits and the challenges of this field. Okay, so let's proceed. How do they form the data set and how do they process the data? So as I have saying, it's not a primary research study and does not involve data collection, cleaning, or processing. Instead, the paper is a review and synthesis of existing research and knowledge of the smart grid, and the authors have used systematic approach to identify and select the most relevant and up-to-date information of the topic. The authors did not form a dataset or engage in any data cleaning or pricing activities, as they were not analyzing any primary data. They reviewed and synthesized information from a variety of secondary sources such as academic papers, industry reports, government publications, to provide a comprehensive overview of a smart grid and its potential benefits, challenges, and future projects. Okay, so as I have reading this, let's go to letter E. What were their findings? So I have here, I think it's four. Their findings was a smart grid can potentially provide significant benefits in terms of increased energy efficiency, improved reliability, and greater integration of renewable energy sources. The implementation of a smart grid is a complex and challenging process requiring significant investment in infrastructure, technology, and policy and regulatory changes. So, at number three, the successful implementation of a smart grid requires collaboration and coordination among stakeholders, including utilities, policymakers, regulators, and consumers. And lastly, continued research and development in smart grid technology is essential to address the challenges and barriers to implementation and to realize the full potential of a smart grid in improving the electric energy system. So, if we were to integrate these smart grids in cities, in provinces, of course, we need to collaborate. We cannot do it on our own. So, I think everyone, including the policymakers, should be involved. So, let's move on to letter F. What were the gaps in their studies or findings? So, we have here number one. The paper does not provide a detailed analysis of the cost and benefits of implementing a smart grid, and it is unclear how the benefits of smart grid compare to the cost of implementation. And also, the paper does not discuss the potential social and economic impacts of smart grid, such as changes in employment, the workforce development, changes in consumer behavior, and impacts on vulnerable communities. And lastly, the paper does not provide an in-depth analysis of the policy and regulatory changes required to support the implementation of a smart grid, and it is unclear how these changes would be implemented and enforced. So, so much for that. And letter G, let's go to letter G, the last section of this presentation. So what are my takeaways on this paper review? So as I have read this paper, I have come up with a four takeaways about this paper, about this article. So number one, continued research and development. The paper highlights the need for continued research and development in smart grid technology. This is because the implementation of a smart grid requires a significant investment in infrastructure, technology, and the policy and regulatory changes, and there are still significant challenges and barriers to overcome. Therefore, continued research and development is essential to address these challenges and to realize the full potential of a smart grid in improving the electric energy system. Okay, and we have here number two, collaboration and coordination. The successful implementation of smart grid requires collaboration and coordination among stakeholders, including utilities, policymakers, regulators, and consumers. This is because the smart grid is a complex and interdependent system, and all stakeholders have, have a role to play in its development and implementation. Therefore, it is important to foster collaboration and coordination among stakeholders to ensure that the smart grid is implemented in a way that maximizes its benefits and minimizes its challenges. Okay? Okay, so number three, the cost and benefits. While the paper provides a comprehensive overview of the potential benefits of a smart grid, it is important to consider the cost and benefits in more detail to fully understand the economic, social, and environmental impacts of a smart grid. This is because the implementation of a smart grid requires a significant investment, and it is important to determine whether the benefits of a smart grid outweighs the cost. Therefore, further research and analysis is needed to fully understand the cost and benefits of a smart grid. As I was saying earlier, one of the key challenges of the implementation of a smart grid system is first uh, the collaboration. So we need to all the stakeholders involved in this kind of system must collaborate, and also it is vital to fully comprehend the cost, whether it can uh, whether it can be efficient, so that if because if it's very costly, then I think we can say that the with the current uh, grid, or the current electric grid is much more uh, cost efficient rather than implement this kind of system. So that's why we need to uh, fully assess what's the capability of our current technology we have. And last but not the least, the policy and regulatory changes. The successful implementation of a smart grid also requires significant policy and regulatory challenges to support the development and implementation of a smart grid. Therefore, it is important to develop policies and regulations that support the deployment of smart grid technologies and that encourage the participation of all stakeholders in the smart grid. This is also because the policy and regulatory environment can have a significant impact on the development and implementation of smart grid, and it is important to ensure that policies and regulations are in place to support the successful implementation of a smart grid. So that's all for my paper review, and thank you for listening.